We wait for the dawn as a gardener waits for spring.
This quote is from Antoine de Saint-Exupéry's Wind, Sand, and Stars, which we will talk about today. So we want to introduce you to the book and just share our thoughts about it with you.
It's definitely a great book that it was recommended to me by my colleague here, my friend, by Leroy. And it's a very short book, actually, if you look at it. It's among those many books, for instance, Little Prince, which this author wrote. I really struggle with pronouncing the name. So if I say today that it's the author, then I mean Exupéry. So it's a very short book, but I think it packs a lot of literary devices, very nice language that really describes the scenes that he's trying to describe from his own life. So, Leo, what can you tell us about the author?
Yeah, so Antoine de Saint-Exupéry was born into a relatively rich French family and was exposed to a very upper class lifestyle. And he struggled quite a bit to like fit into the life which he was expected to live. And he started to dream about flying very early on, and actually got into it on like very complicated paths because it wasn't possible for him to actually get into the flight school in mainland France. So he actually learned flying in Morocco, I think it was. And this book, Wind, Sand, and Stars, is very much about his experiences as a pilot during those very early days of air travel. And like he was one of those great pioneers who established the very first routes for air travel.
Why do you think he desired to fly as a child? Because when I was reading this book, you read it first, and as I said, you recommended it to me. I sort of felt that, by the way, Exupéry is definitely famous for his Little Prince book. I think that's the one that most of our viewers will know, but very few people know about Wind, Sand, and Stars, which is this book. Including myself, I had no idea that
actually,
other books
in
exist.
France, it's apparently very different. So in France, Wind, Sand, and Stars is still quite well known. And it was actually a book which led to an upsurge in like people signing up for flight school and stuff like that. And also and which was also like interpreted in an anti-German, like French nationalistic way during the times of German occupation.
Okay, and I didn't know that. But when was the time when he was writing this book? When was it written?
I don't know exactly when it was written, but it came out during the Second World War.
During the Second World War. Yeah, I could really feel the 1920s.
American exile.
Yeah, I could feel the 1920s, perhaps, in the style that he writes in this book. And I'm not sure if you already talked about it, but this book primarily concerns his experiences as a pilot in various countries in Africa, right, in the north of Africa and Sahara. But there's also stories from Argentina, but those are not connected to him, but to his fellows, if I'm correct.
No, he was also there in Argentina, and I think like one or two of like the smaller stories take place in Argentina.
Okay.
But you're right, the stuff concerning him is mostly Northern Africa.
Yeah, definitely, and that's exactly where, at least for me, as a person who read the book just once, the name Wind, Sand, and Stars comes from. That's the experiences from Sahara, and when you are there, there's basically everything you can see there, right? It's basically just hollow void of heat, presumably during the day, sand, stars, and wind. That's the first part of the name of the book.
No, it's very much that setting, and the book actually uses the title once.
Yeah.
And it's in one of those parts where he's in the North African desert. There it actually says wind, sand, and stars.
I think it was actually twice there.
Okay.
Yeah, I think in the first third of the book it appears there, and I could really catch a glimpse of it. But now I think we are sort of transitioning to the theme of, because when I imagine myself standing on a desert, um, with wind, sand, and stars, and as I already said, there's pretty much nothing, and when we contrast it to Europe back then, and even Europe right now, it's such a huge difference of the abundance that we have in Europe in like material possessions, in like basic needs. Everything's covered here. And yet he's writing about this setting where you have basically three things, wind, sand, and stars. You have no water, you have no food. And it writes it in this beautiful way of describing it as freeing, as freedom, and I think that's very difficult to imagine for so many people right now, to be alone in this place and feel the beauty.
Um,
Or you disagree with me?
no. I think that is why he sought out those experiences, like because they are so different from everything he could experience in Europe, everything this normal upper class life he was destined to live could have provided for him.
Mm-hmm.
He despised those people who dwelt in modern cities. I think he says it in the book more than once. And not for who they are as a person, but for what the environment they are living in does to them and does to their spirits. So he often compares what he's doing to the work of a gardener or the work um, of a physicist or the work of a musician. And he sees, I think he appreciates the process of creating something, of discovering a new frontier.
Yeah, I think we can really see. Oh, it's very obvious his criticism towards, how to say, very unified, not simple, but just mundane life of being a cleric or working as a bureaucrat, and in many parts of this book he talks about these routines, these professions that are very common among us, as sort of a prison that a person builds by themselves, that. And this is maybe an interpretation, but I think it's quite fitting to describe it as people, as the way of protecting themselves, as providing security and substance to their lives. They enclose themselves in this little prison, which at first might seem comfortable and might seem as the solution to the lives in Europe. Sort of, let's talk about Europe, and at the modern world back then. But what he's trying to say is this: it might be comfortable for a while, but ultimately it kills your creativity, it kills your human spirit.
Yeah, and you mentioned accountants, and like I don't know what it is, but he seems to have like a special dislike for that profession.
Definitely. Why do you
Um,
think so?
huh?
Why do you think so?
Because he mentions it over and over again in the book.
Well, what do you think might be
He
the
has an
reason for that?
example for like the soul-crushing nature
Mm.
of the modern life in cities, and I mean that was yeah 100 years ago
Oh,
basically.
yeah, I think
80, 90, 100 years ago. Like it's about the interwar period.
what I find quite complicating the story and the themes is that we can see the criticism of modernization, as we now talk about the clerics, the bureaucrats, and everything else. But at the same time, he seems to benefit modernization through the use of planes. You know, uh, you know what I'm trying to say.
he's not against modernization in itself.
Yeah.
There's also this part. It's the third part of, like, the third chapter, the third short story. I don't know how
Yeah,
you want.
should we briefly mention the structure of the book?
Sure, sure.
Yeah, yeah. Go on.
So the book is divided into, I don't know if you would call it like separate short stories or chapters. I think probably chapters fits it well enough. So it's basically 8 chapters of varying length. So I think 1 or 2 are just like a handful of pages, even less. And then again, like, other ones are quite lengthy, like more than 20 pages. In general, it's a really short book. So yeah, and in these chapters, he tackles different parts of his experience as one of those pioneers of air travel, of airmail. And he puts a special focus on themes like camaraderie, um, the human condition, a certain kind of connectedness to nature.
Yeah. If I can briefly just
Yeah,
mention what I thought about the structure of the book, it's as you said, it's divided into these sub chapters that are either his or stories by his fellows or his friends, that are set by their perspective. If I'm not mistaken.
he he usually tells it from the first person, because most of it is his own,
Yeah.
like, is what he himself lived through.
What I find quite empowering in this entire book, and I think this is a theme that occurs among many other authors, and that it's not really written chronologically.
No,
So
not at all. Yeah.
yeah, so you find these like staggered stories happening in times that you do not really know. Occasionally, he mentions some timing and some seasons and stuff like that, so you can really orient yourself. But what it does at first to reader is that it really confuses you. It sort of it's difficult to place it in time to really see what's going on. But I think what's powerful in this technique is to sort of symbolize the structure of memories. Like, because when you were to write a book right now about your memories or memories by other people, you would hardly ever think about it chronologically. I think things would just like pop up in your head, sometimes
Yeah,
from
yeah, exactly.
2010, sometimes from 2015. And I think exactly what this book tries to represent, and that is this sort of construction of the past, of those memories. And it doesn't matter when they happened. What is more important, that they happened and when people learned from them, or what he learned from it.
Exactly, and I think that's the point, because like the last sentence you said, like, what he learned and what people can learn. Because I think in the end, like, all those chapters, um, they they are not so much about the narratives which are told in them, because often it's more than one. Like, he often has like several narratives happening after each other within the chapter. But I think the narratives are not really the important part. What's more important is what he wants to bring across, the underlying message. So I think the narratives and, like, those stories, they are just a vehicle for him to get those points across.
Definitely.
Um,
Definitely.
so for example, like comrades, sure, he tells about experiences of his comrades, of the other pilots, who were exploring this new frontier with him, and he tells about his own experiences with camaraderie.
Mm-hmm.
But in the end, he all ties it together to basically give us his thoughts on camaraderie, what it means to him, what it means to our shared humanity.
Definitely, yeah. And just a short point on this, I think by really not closing these stories to a certain time frame, it enables him to transcend, decades and centuries, because it doesn't really matter when it happened, but we can use the experience that he learned even now. I think that's very powerful.
Yeah, exactly. Those are like you couldn't experience the things he experienced today. Like to a large extent, those experiences would be impossible to make today. But the underlying messages and the beliefs which he discovered through those experiences, I think they still can have a lot of relevance in today's society.
Yeah, and I think when we are talking about those stories that happen in the book, I personally, now when I'm sort of moving to the overall picture over the book, I didn't really like the first third or so. I found myself, because I'm like myself.
Go through the chapters.
What? We can go through the chapters. Now I just want to say, I'm not personally someone who enjoys literature that's very descriptive over, the surroundings, or to appreciate the beauty. And this is not to say that I don't appreciate it irrationally, but it just doesn't have this emotional impact on me,
Yeah, I get that.
And that's partially because I think that experience cannot be transferred, so, and this is just my personal trait, I think, in my character. So when I'm somewhere, let's say on a trip, I think the experiences, the emotions, the way I feel about a place cannot be described in any language, in any photo. It cannot be, transferred to someone else. And
yeah,
so when I was reading the descriptive paragraphs, I thought about, his emotions that he was feeling, and yet I felt distant, but that's a different thing. What I want to focus on, I think maybe we can do chapter by chapter, but I really like the Sahara thing, so he's flying with a comrade of his, I think it's from Libya.
Let's talk about this later then.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay.
Go through chapter by chapter, because
it's the best for me.
That's at the very end of the book. So
okay. I like beginning from the end. So